Hello everybody, welcome back to another online lesson from the Elizabeth GCSE. Today we are going to be looking at what challenges is Elizabeth facing from Europe by 1570. So she's been in power for just over 10 years. This is an interesting topic, but also quite important, but a little bit tricky too, in the sense of we're going to start now thinking about how relations with Spain are going to worsen. Again, quite similar to the Cold War course. Everything that happens from 1570 onwards is going to probably, you could argue, be a step towards war or a cause of the war. So long-term causes right up to the 1580s, where they'll become short-term trigger causes of the war. So as we go through this lesson, just try to keep in mind how each thing that happens is affecting relations between Elizabeth and Philip. And in the end, it culminates in the Spanish Armada. So most of this lesson is going to focus on Holland in the Netherlands. We remember why the Netherlands is so important for us, because of the trade import in Antwerp. But also there is a large Protestant population there, and this lesson will look at the Spanish Inquisition and the sort of tricky position that puts Elizabeth into. She's got to make a choice. Does she help? Can she help? Remember, she's in debt, thinking back to the last couple of lessons. So let's crack on and let's see where this story takes us. Just remember, everything that happens from now on is going to contribute to the Spanish Armada in 1588. Well, you may well have to decide who's most to blame. That could be quite a nice question that they might ask us. Okay, so what does Europe look like in 1570? So similarly to what we talked about last lesson, we looked at specifically focusing on Scotland, France, Spain and the Netherlands, but this is the general makeup of Europe. You'll recognise most of the countries in there. So previously, if I might have mentioned Germany, at this point Germany isn't necessarily a state or a country of its own. It's like lots of little states, and it comes under really the Holy Roman Empire, which is probably one of the biggest powerhouses in Europe and in the world at the time. So the middle, so you see the centre of Europe there, right next to the Spanish Netherlands. So they're the Netherlands that have been conquered by Philip. Wouldn't necessarily be a problem for us, really, other than the fact that Antwerp is there and we have some interests. While we are here looking at this map, just look how close the Spanish Netherlands is to England. We'll need to keep that in mind shortly when we think about the danger of a Spanish invasion. If they have taken over the Netherlands already, you can see from this map that it wouldn't take very much at all to jump over and get to England and come to London, and then that would be that. Alright, so there is a growing Protestantism in Europe, as we know. Started off in those German states by Martin Luther, a protest against the Catholic religion, if you like, and it's growing. There's Protestants in Spain, in France, sorry, not Spain, definitely not in Spain, in Scotland, France, the Netherlands, and in parts of the Holy Roman Empire where it sort of came from. And obviously, as we know, England is Protestant because the Queen is Protestant. So it's there, it's spreading, and as we talked about last lesson, that's where the Pope is on this counter-reformation, determined to overthrow it at source and rid the world of these Protestant heretics. So these issues quite clearly show that Europe is a bit of a powder keg, quite similar, I suppose, to World War One at the beginning. You know, there's lots of little alliances, and it's going to take one event that is going to blow this whole thing up. In this case, it's religion. So really, Europe being a bit of a mess is useful in the sense that Elizabeth can concentrate on just England in the hope that they'll be busy dealing with themselves. And partly that has become true. For 10 years, as we know, Elizabeth hasn't really had many real problems at home. The settlement was quite good. It's only recently, isn't it, with Mary Queen of Scots arriving and the Pope's Papal Bull, where things have started to get a little bit hotter. So that's the situation in Europe, just to give you some context before we go into this lesson. It's quite important that we understand what is happening so we can understand why skirmishes might crop up, and also why marriage alliances might be important, particularly for this Protestant queen who everyone expects to get married. So she has been in power for a while now. She's still not married. Still possible that she could have an heir, but as the years go on for a woman, it gets a bit more tricky as you get older. So potentially that could be a bit of an issue in England now as well, that Elizabeth's getting a little bit older. All right, but she's still young enough probably to get married at this point. So let's have a little moment to just focus on France for a sec. We see right in the middle of Europe, massive country, massive population, probably the second most powerful nation in the world at the time, or certainly the Western world, closely just behind Spain. So religious war has broken out in France recently. Okay, so remember in England in 1559 she passes the religious settlement. So just a few years after that, in France there was a religious civil war. The exact thing that Elizabeth had tried to stop happen in England, and she did manage to stop it in England. But clearly she wasn't wrong in worrying about it because it happened in France. So that, in a way, is good for England in the sense that France is busy, so it's not going to be worried about England so much at the moment. Particularly, remember, we've inherited that war earlier from Mary, so that could be one reason perhaps why relations might start improving there. So why might it worry Elizabeth? And just pause the video and make a little note in your book or wherever you're writing your notes about why this civil war in France might worry Elizabeth, and then come back to the video. Alright, so I suppose the most obvious reason why it might worry Elizabeth is it could inspire rebellion in England as well. So the religious people in England who might be ready for a bit of a fight, they might look at France and go, yes, we want that here too. They may even get support from France, from Elizabeth's enemies. I don't know, it just might trigger a similar event in England. Maybe with Elizabeth not being so harsh in enforcing the settlement might mean the people are less willing to attack her and follow this suit. But that's the worry that it might happen in England. She has also helped some of these French Protestants. Partly, remember Calais, we talked about Calais being important to her because it was embarrassing that England had lost it. So she's helped the French Protestants in this civil war, which is a bit risky really, isn't it? Considering that she's trying to, I suppose, fix relations with France. So who do you think that might have upset, the fact that she's got involved in another country? Yeah, so I would agree that probably Philip wouldn't be too happy with that. Philip would be probably thinking to himself, hang on a minute, this has got nothing to do with you, but out. But when we say helped, I wouldn't get too carried away like she sent huge armies into France. But yeah, she has definitely got herself involved in this. A little bit risky, but also she's trying to show off herself, trying to show some strength, isn't she? And maybe sees an opportunity here while France is in turmoil to get back Calais. I don't know. She's that kind of politician as well. Never one to miss a trick when she has a chance. Okay, so let's have a little think now before we get into the actual story about Spain. So some backstory for Spain. As we know, King Philip II is the most powerful man in the world, probably, or in the Western world. He has conquered most of South America at this point, is essentially going to be in charge of the whole European powerhouse, with family links to the Holy Roman Empire and, of course, Spain and the Catholic. So just this Catholic league, this Catholic united load of countries. I suppose, again, you could probably argue similar to NATO and things like that. So he's there. He is a little bit upset with Elizabeth already because she rejected his marriage proposal. But remember, England and Spain was generally okay at the beginning. Relations are now starting to get worse. Remember, we've said this lesson is the beginnings of where that relationship starts to worsen to the point of no return. So this is the sort of things that Philip might be concerned with. He is annoyed that Elizabeth has got herself involved with these Protestant skirmishes in France and Scotland. He thinks it's nothing to do with her. I don't suppose Philip particularly wants to go to war with Elizabeth either. But he's a little bit upset by that. He just thinks Elizabeth shouldn't have bothered. And then in 1563, in response to that, he has banned English cloth to the Netherlands. So that one thing that we've been talking quite a lot about in these lessons, especially thinking about how 90% of England's export is wool and goes through Antwerp. The one thing she was trying to avoid at all costs was to lose the trading port of Antwerp. So here we are in 1563, Elizabeth's worst nightmare has come true. Philip has blocked the sale of English cloth. And that is going to add to England's woes, particularly the economy that's already struggling. Poverty is rising. I suppose this is Philip's way of trying to get back at Elizabeth for getting herself involved in these Protestant battles. So that is, as we've just said, really critical for the economy. It's not going to allow Elizabeth to prepare for any sort of battle. In fact, it's going to send England backwards a little bit. So she probably now has to sort this out. I guess the way Philip would stop the block, if you like, to English cloth is to make some sort of deal with him. It could be something as simple as getting out, stopping and being involved, or something a bit more serious. So as we go through this, we'll see what happens in this situation. But yeah, very, very worrying for Elizabeth that Philip has blocked our trade in Antwerp. All right, so she then responds, because this is Elizabeth we're talking about, by stopping trade with the Spanish Netherlands. Remember, everybody wants English wool. It's the best. But also, trade goes two ways, doesn't it? A country requires trade, export and import. All countries do. So Elizabeth's sort of hoping here that she can almost persuade Philip to stop his little block of English cloth, because it's going to affect the Spanish economy as well, because they're not going to be able to trade with things that they buy in the market. So you've got these two, I don't know, egos again, going head to head, trying to win this initial skirmish. I don't think we're anywhere near a war at this point, but you can see hopefully that the relations are definitely getting a little bit strained, and religion is the main cause of that. So Elizabeth, maybe that surprises you that she comes back quite aggressively in response to Philip banning English cloth. This will last for about a year, this sort of back and forth, and in the end Philip will reopen trade in about a year's time, but that's caused a lot of damage economically to England in that 1 year of not trading. Equally, it's not helped the Spanish economy either. All right, so as we've said, after 1 year it's over, the embargo. She is more concerned that Spain will in the end join forces with France, so she just basically gives up, and then he gives up, and they get back to potentially soothing out relations, except for things in the Netherlands are going to get very, very, very serious very, very quickly. All right, so just a little stop point in this lesson, just to keep in the focus that I'm trying to get in your head, that we are seeing this as a long-term step to war. You must see the Spanish relationship as the early part where it's starting to get worse, and then the later relationship breakdown. So around about the 1580s, that's where it gets very serious. But if you see the chronology of this course, that it's sort of a different topic, but the seeds are being sown to a breakdown of relations. That's where we are right now. All right, so they will worsen significantly. This has just been a little bit of a nuisance, this trade embargo, and Philip is just a little bit miffed with Elizabeth. It's going to get much, much worse. All right, so let's think about this Spanish Netherlands then before we look at the Spanish Inquisition. Some of the images that we'll see in a sec are a little bit, well, some of you might not particularly like them, but that is what happened. It was a brutal period of history. So you can see how important the Spanish Netherlands is to Europe. It's right in the middle of Europe. It's really close to us. You can see we know where King's Lynn is, where our school is, really close to the trade and port, hence why King's Lynn was so important in the Hanseatic League. But generally speaking, the Netherlands is good for that reason. It's close, but it's also dangerous because the Spanish could quite easily just jump over to England if they felt the need to. All right, so he has taken control of the Netherlands in the 16th century. So, I don't know, not long before Elizabeth became queen, he takes the Spanish Netherlands, just like he's taken South America, and he is going on a mission to kill all the Protestants. And that is part of what the worry is about England, is that he sort of got this permission from the Pope to, the counter-reformation that we've talked about. So what he does in Holland, in the Netherlands, it's very possible and very probable that he may well do this in England. So this geographical issue is something to keep in mind, and we'll talk about the actual danger in a minute with some facts and figures. But remember this situation with England in the old alliance with Scotland and France. They could attack through Scotland. The Spanish could jump over from the Spanish Netherlands. England really is in a precarious, vulnerable position. So the politics that Elizabeth plays in these early years, it was amazing, because you can see how easy it could have been for Philip to just pop over and take over. So what was their relationship really like? We know that he's not happy that she rejected the marriage, but they have had this traditional alliance. Remember, he was married to her sister, Catherine of Aragon was Spanish, marrying Henry VIII. So England and Spain has been generally okay. I feel like they were okay when they were brother and sister-in-law. Just this one teeny tiny disagreement they have on religion. All right. So how it goes sour very quickly. Actually, the relationship breakdown. But it was inevitable. I feel like when religion's involved and when the Pope gets involved and starts essentially giving people permission to kill Protestants, it's not going to take long, is it, until this reaches England's shores. It's actually took about 30 years, really, so she did quite well for that before 1588. So Philip is wanting to marry Elizabeth, not because he loves Elizabeth. It's nothing about love in this period. It's about convenience, and he wants to be King of England again, and that would make things a lot easier. Maybe in hindsight, if we'd have lost the Spanish Armada, that might have been the most sensible thing to do, to marry the most powerful man in Europe and just let the country continue as Catholic. Elizabeth could carry on and produce heirs. I know it wouldn't have been ideal because she's a Protestant, but it could well have saved England as it was. We didn't need to worry because Elizabeth kicked his butt anyway. All right, so should the following statements worry Elizabeth? So it might be a good idea when we go through these statements now on this video, if you pause it after each one and write in your book why the following statements should worry Elizabeth and maybe why they shouldn't. Okay, so the first one, the Pope was God's man on earth, and so what he says goes to the Catholics. He influenced all other Catholic rulers as well as normal Catholics around Europe, including in England. Should that worry Elizabeth? If you think so, then just say why. When you're ready, unpause the video and carry on. Secondly, Spain were busy dealing with the Netherlands and so initially weren't that interested in supporting the Catholics in England. This is a good thing for Elizabeth, I think it goes without saying. They're not really going to be invading England whilst they're currently in an invasion of the Netherlands. Although that could easily change, so she does need to watch the situation. So again, make a little note to yourself if you think that she should be worried about that. Thirdly, France were also dealing with their own religious civil war, so too weren't too bothered about England. Again, giving Elizabeth a little bit of a wiggle room, if you like, to try the settlement, to see how it goes, without getting too dramatic and too aggressive. She doesn't need to, but she can relax just a little bit, knowing that France and Spain are currently busy with their own affairs. But just to put in your mind, those affairs could change at any point. The wind may change, as they say, and they could turn their attention to England. So at the moment, she's loving it because they're busy elsewhere. Fourthly, should she be worried about the fact that Protestantism was growing around Europe, even in strong Catholic countries? So the Catholic powers have grown even more determined to stop it spreading, which has united all of these Catholic countries together. All right, so that's quite obvious. Just when you've answered this one, unpause and then come back to the video. So just hopefully you've written there or noticed that this is definitely a serious threat. You are essentially creating a Catholic powerhouse. That is definitely something that she should worry about. And then even King Philip II of Spain would rather have had Elizabeth on the throne over Mary, Queen of Scots. Now that might confuse you a little bit. So maybe pause the video and answer that question, whether you think it's dangerous for Elizabeth, but also why you think Philip would rather have Elizabeth, the Protestant, than Mary, Queen of Scots. Okay, so I wonder if you figure that out. The reason why Philip would rather have Elizabeth on the throne is because if Mary, Queen of Scots, becomes Queen of England as well, then of course England and France become a natural ally, which could then be quite dangerous for Philip and Philip's interests. So at the moment, having England sort of separate helps him a little bit too. All right, that's just quite an interesting little aside to the story. Also, some Catholics wanted Elizabeth excommunicated by the Pope. Remember we talked a little bit about what excommunicated means? Essentially that she'll be going to hell. Not sure she's too bothered because she's Protestant, and probably doesn't mind what the Pope says. However, she is religious still, so there is always a concern. So there's a little bit of tension there probably as well. So if you are using this video on Google Classroom, you will have these documents uploaded as well. If you're not, and you're just using your book or any other form of making these notes, these little tension diagrams are going to be useful as we go through the next bit of the story to make some summary notes in the boxes, so for the Dutch Revolt and for the Genoese loan, and colour up in those boxes. The higher up you go, the more tense or the more dangerous the situation is. So if you think something, for example, is no worry at all, then maybe just colour in the bottom box. See it as a scale. We're going to see these white boxes quite a lot over the next few lessons, because I think they're quite a nice way for you to see visually what events in the chronology of the story get more dangerous. We could probably do something similar when revising for the Cold War as well. So obviously we're going to see the Dutch Revolt in the 60s and 70s, the Genoese loan in 1568, and we'll see Mary Queen of Scots, and we'll see the Northern Rebellion in the rest of this lesson. So, the Dutch Revolt, quite a complicated topic. It's definitely not the easiest of topics, but it's something that is going to draw Elizabeth in to a conflict eventually. So, we'll break down the story quite quickly. I'll reveal the information in this screen as we go. It's not overly difficult, but it's a little bit tricky. So, if you do have any questions on the Dutch Revolt, please let us know in class or drop us a line. So, firstly, the revolt begins in 1566. So, it goes without saying, a revolt is like a rebellion, fighting against the occupation. We can definitely think about this, thinking about Czechoslovakia and Hungary. They weren't happy with the Soviet occupation. So, in this case, Philip has decided to reorganize the Dutch government, and he sends the Spanish Inquisition, this really, I suppose there is only one word for it, evil response to crush the Protestants in the Netherlands. They are very, very unpopular, as you'll see from some of the images shortly, and that's why they revolt. That is as simple as it is. In 1566, the Protestants in the Netherlands fight back. Now, obviously, like the Cold War, like the Hungarians and the Czechs, were probably hoping they get some help from America. Similarly, in this, they're probably looking for some help from any of the Protestant countries in Europe or any Protestant allies, and the most obvious of those is clearly Elizabeth. But remember, she's skint, and she is going to try and avoid at any cost a war with Spain. So the Dutch Revolt goes on. The year later, the Duke of Alba goes into the Netherlands, and he takes a Spanish army of 10,000 men. Now, that's a lot of soldiers in the Tudor period. The Dutch haven't really got a chance in hell of defeating them, but they're just putting up a rebellion in the hope that someone maybe helps. So this is 1567, so still in that early period of the strain in relations. Philip is going to probably wait to see what Elizabeth does, but remember what we've said about the geography of the Netherlands? 10,000 soldiers so close to England, that is a real worry for Elizabeth, okay? A real worry. As we'll see in the next few lessons, it's probably due to this where she starts, I say flirting isn't maybe the right word, but she starts maybe leading France on a little bit, thinking that she might marry the heir to the French throne. She's doing that really just to try and make Philip not do anything to England. But there's only so long you can lead people on, isn't there? Especially when you're leading a country like France on. So Alba sets up this thing called the Council of Troubles to restore the order, just like the Hungarians were restored, shall we say, by 1,000 tanks. So very, very similar situation here. Thousands are killed, and mainly Protestants. So then if we get to 67, 68, Elizabeth's going to take some action. Now, it's really important that we refer to this bit as indirect action. We'll use that term a lot over the next few lessons. Indirect action. So something that might be clever or a little bit sly even, but something where Philip can never quite accuse her of going to war against him. You know, like an act of war, an aggressive act that he could say, oh, well, that's it, we're going to war. So this indirect intervention from Elizabeth is really important, that it looks like she's got nothing to do with it, even though Philip is very much aware that she has. So the first thing Elizabeth does is lets the Dutch Protestant refugees come to England. Now, again, very, very similar to what we've seen in the Ukraine situation at the moment, as the NATO troops have not gone into Ukraine. They have not put soldiers on the ground, but the West has taken refugees, hasn't it? And it has provided some support financially and some equipment, whereas even that could be argued is a bit too direct for what Elizabeth is hoping for. But hopefully that analogy or that little similarity can help you understand the situation where we are now. Some of these Dutch rebels, who they're called the Sea Beggars, we'll talk about the Sea Beggars from now on as the Sea Beggars, they start attacking Spanish ships in the English Channel. That's probably not what Elizabeth needs, because it's in the English Channel. She could argue there's nothing to do with her. They're Dutch rebels, aren't they? But the fact is that she's allowing some of these ships to port in English ports. So it looks bad, doesn't it, to Philip? It looks like Elizabeth is helping them to attack his ships. So maybe we're thinking about this tension bar before you start getting too far into the story. Remember, they've got a box there for the Dutch Revolt to be colouring in your box up to the 8th box. If you colour in right up to 8, that would be similar to nuclear or Cuba. That would be something really serious. If you think so far that this Dutch Revolt is just a bit potentially dangerous, then colour it up, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 boxes. So the fact that she's allowing these sea beggars to attack Philip's ships and then dock in English ports is just angering Philip a little bit more. You could argue clearly this is Elizabeth's actions that's leading to some of this. But she is trying to be a nuisance. She is not trying to go to war with Philip. So then in 1568, there's some Spanish ships carrying gold that Philip has borrowed from Genoa. So like a bank, he's got a loan that he's going to use to pay for his troops in Spain, to pay Alba, in the Netherlands. And Elizabeth steals the gold. She steals the gold. She says it's Genoa's money, not Philip's, but Philip is absolutely furious. So we'll do the Genoese loan as a separate box with the little threat bar up. But 67 to 68, I think you can start to see, especially now that we've done the Cold War course, how these things are worsening relations, are making the whole situation a little bit more tense. It is Genoa's gold, obviously, but Philip's going to have to pay that back. He's the one who took the loan. So I don't know what Elizabeth's thinking doing there. That's quite quite an aggressive line of action there. So then in 1568, obviously, very, very quickly, with 10,000 troops, the Dutch Protestants are absolutely crushed, battered, job done. However, where this gets a little bit scary for us in England is that Alba is going to remain in the Netherlands with his 10,000 soldiers. So overall, if you go back to your Dutch Revolt box, make some notes to summarise what's happened in the Dutch Revolt and decide how dangerous you think the Dutch Revolt is. And then we'll move on to the next bit when you're ready. Just unpause the video and press play. So, why should Elizabeth be worried about this Dutch Revolt? Okay, so this is, if you think the Dutch Revolt isn't that bad, maybe the information that's going to come on the screen now might change your mind and you colour your bars a bit higher, or it might just confirm what you already thought, that it was very, very serious. So Alba's got this massive army within striking distance. That's got to be something that you've judged to be important, okay? And if you haven't, take it from me, that's a worry for Elizabeth, that these people could just invade at any time. Elizabeth didn't want to become Europe's leading Protestant, though. She doesn't want to be the hero of the Protestant faith. She just wants to deal with England and get England sorted. So she's going to try and avoid a war wherever possible. And she openly condemns the Dutch rebels, even though she helps the sea beggars and steals some of the gold from Philip. So there's Elizabeth in a nutshell for you right there. Thirdly, the Dutch rebels, they are fleeing, this, as we know, we call the sea beggars, attacking these ships, and she's harbouring them. That's never going to go down well, and it absolutely doesn't, trust me. Philip is furious. The communication is starting to get a little bit more serious now, but Elizabeth could hold her hands up and say, well, they're just porting there, aren't they? I haven't really done anything, but clearly she has. All right, so if you haven't, or you need to add a little bit now, fill in this box now with your notes, summarise the Dutch Revolt. I personally think the Dutch Revolt should be at least 5. I think there's a lot of potential here. At least 5 maybe, possibly not right up to 8, but it'll be interesting to know what you think of this one. All right, so let's start thinking about this Spanish Inquisition. Just take a step aside a little bit. On the image, if you just pause the video and just make a note of all of the things that you can see in this picture. This is an engraving of the Spanish Inquisition in the Netherlands. This Council of the Troubles, so remember, like, I suppose in Czechoslovakia, the Warsaw Pact have gone in to sort it out. They're going to persecute all the rebels and the heretics, anyone who's gone against Philip. So make a list of as many things as you can, and then when you're ready, come back to the video. So hopefully you've seen the obvious. There's people being drowned, the people being beheaded, hanged, all sorts of horrific deaths. And this isn't even this is not even bad when you see some of the other pictures. Just before we do move on to some of those other pictures of the Spanish Inquisition, why might Elizabeth be worried about this? That's a question really to think about. I feel like it's obvious that she sees potentially this happening in England. If the Spanish decide to come to England and bring the Spanish Inquisition with them to England, the scene that you're looking at now in this video is absolutely going to happen. It's going to be inevitable. So some more images of the Spanish Inquisition again. Just maybe pause the video and add to your list the things that you're seeing in here. Just lots of torture going on to these Protestant heretics. You can see in this picture, quite interestingly, on the right hand side, there's the crucifix with these religious bishops and archbishops. In the middle, I feel like I don't know what they're doing, pouring liquid into his mouth. That person being hanged, this person on the floor with his feet. That looks like some sort of, I don't know, stocks might be burning his feet. Just torture. If you're really interested in the Spanish Inquisition, it wouldn't take you long to go down a rabbit hole doing a little bit of research yourself. So then this is another image of the Spanish Inquisition. You can see this wheel being spun with a fire at the bottom. So as the wheel goes round in this particular torture, it does eventually break all of the bones in your body. Some people have said this is where the Catherine wheel comes from, firework night. So there'll be some sort of fire on this as this poor person is being spun around on this wheel. I don't know if that's true, but potentially there's a bit of a link there. So yeah, as this person is being pulled around, all of their bones are breaking, and there's a fire every time they get around to the bottom. They're getting a little bit of burning. Again, horrendous torture and cruelty. This one we can see there's people, a lady there, looks like her clothes being ripped off. People being burnt as heretics, quite a common thing. This is what it would have looked like in England, with Mary killing those Protestants, 284 of them. The bushels being put on. You can just see a really horrendous scene of these poor Dutch Protestants, just to try and, I don't know, finish this rebellion. And some people would argue that they shouldn't have rebelled against Philip, but at the same time, if you could argue that in Hungary or Czechoslovakia or anywhere, couldn't you? If someone invades your country, you're going to fight back, aren't you? So this one, again, another particularly cruel way. This is humiliating as well. So they've put Catholic, the bishop's hat on them. This one where they twist a bit of rope around your neck from behind with a stick of some sort, and as they twist it, the rope obviously squeezes into your throat. Eventually will break your neck. Sometimes they put a knot just in the middle of your throat, so as it gets tight around your neck, you can imagine the damage that does. This one, pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? They are putting you on the fire, face first, or holding you to it, then letting you down, and holding you to it and letting you down. The common thing with all of these images in the Spanish Inquisition is the crowds that are watching. It may well put people off fighting back. That's the idea of being so aggressive, I suppose. Or it may well create all these martyrs. Remember that Elizabeth was worried about creating herself. And the Spanish donkey, you might remember that from year 7. Weights are put onto the legs on this really pointy wooden beam, if you like, and it's going to cause some damage there too. This one, you can see, again, is going to cause some horrendous pain. Or they're all going to cause pain, aren't they? This goes without saying. And then this one, bit of a warning. It's an old picture, but it's really graphic. Again, goes without saying. Horrendous thing to happen. Whether these things actually happened or they became mythical propaganda, even, I don't know. But the Spanish Inquisition, there is absolutely no doubt, was horrendous. So all that said, the question we have to think about now is, how might the Spanish Inquisition have made Elizabeth feel? She's a Protestant. She's a human. Just like many of the horrific events in history that we've seen more recently, the Holocaust or the slave trade or whatever, it affects us, doesn't it? Because we are human beings. This would have been no different. This would have been horrendous. Granted, it wouldn't have been on television and all that kind of stuff wouldn't have been so visible, but with the printing press, the stories will be passing around Europe, definitely, in all the pubs around Europe. would be becoming quite a well-known event. So the Protestants in England would start asking Elizabeth to help. She obviously can't or won't do it directly. So essentially, it's going to make Elizabeth feel sick, but also really, really scared. That's the point. So let's think for a second, this next part of this lesson. Let's pretend that we're in the Privy Council. So you're going to be William Cecil. There's going to be a little conversation between Cecil and Elizabeth. You can make some notes in your book about what you think we should do and why we should do it. So if we start off with him saying to the Queen that Spain is this great Catholic power, it wants to destroy Protestantism. We must stop this from happening. Remember, Cecil is a Puritan, quite a strict Protestant. He's worried about his religion, and he's putting pressure on Elizabeth. So what is he essentially saying to Elizabeth there? Yeah, so I'm thinking that he's saying to Elizabeth that you really need to do something to help these Dutch, because otherwise it'll be us next. She says, I understand that, but I cannot afford a war against Spain. Remember, England's economy is really poor, especially after that trade embargo. That year really sent England off backwards even. The famines haven't really got any better. She just can't afford a war against Spain, or Spain and France. So she's worried here if she goes into Spain, into Holland, it's going to upset the French Catholics, who then they might join with the Spanish Catholics, and that would be that. So she is really holding off, but she's under pressure here from Cecil, absolutely. So pause the video, become a Privy Councillor, and write in your book on your notes what you think Elizabeth should do about the Dutch Revolt. And when you're ready, come back and we will continue. So, furthermore, Cecil will say to Elizabeth, look, Alba's army is a real threat to England. There are 10,000 of them, just a short boat ride over the English Channel, and all of these Protestants are being killed in the most horrific of ways. You've seen the pictures. That's why it's important that I show you those pictures to understand why Cecil and other Protestants are so worried and so upset by what's happening in the Netherlands. He keeps saying we must help the Dutch Protestants. So he's putting pressure on Elizabeth to do something direct. Remember, she is not going to do direct yet. This is all going to be indirect. So she agrees with Cecil in the Privy Council meeting, but she doesn't want to be seen as this saviour, this Protestant hero marching in to save the world. She doesn't want to be involved in a religious war. She doesn't want a civil war at home. She's just come up with this religious settlement, remember, that is trying to please everybody. So if she goes all guns a-blazing in to help the Dutch Protestants, then essentially what she's worried about is setting up a war against all the Catholics. And that wouldn't just be the Catholics in Europe. That would be the Catholics in England as well. So that's important too. So again, as the Privy Council meeting carries on, with what she said here, has that changed your opinion? Make a little note in your book, pause the video. What would you ask Elizabeth to do in this case? Are you staying firm that you should go in, or stay out, or come up with some clever indirect solution? All right, so the conversation is going to carry on. Cecil says, what is England going to do then? So he's really going at her in this Privy Council meeting. Remember, we meet 3 times a week. This is exactly the kind of thing that we'd meet for. Elizabeth responds by saying, I shall try to make things as difficult as possible for Spain in the Netherlands. And this is the key bit. She is hoping that Philip will just leave, that it's going to become expensive, like Afghanistan a little bit for the Soviets. If she just makes it a little bit of a nuisance of herself without doing anything direct, she's hoping that Philip will just give up and leave. He's made his attack. It's quite clear that the Dutch can't really fight back. Maybe some decision to stop, but the point is, whatever she does, she's going to try and stop going in directly. So maybe at this point, again, your final thoughts on this session's Privy Council meeting. What could she do indirectly? Now, you already know what she's going to do because of the earlier of this lesson with the sea beggars and things like that. But indirect intervention is going to be key. So let's think about then the thing we talked about with the Genoese loan, this money. So you'll have your little box again, that white box. This is where you'll put your notes in. So the notes you're going to see on the slide here on this screen will be put in that box. And again, colour up the side of the box how dangerous you think the Genoese loan was. So this is 1568. This is a couple of years after the Pope has told the Catholics in England not to go to her church, remember, although most of them are still going. Mary Queen of Scots is about to arrive in England. So 1568 is a tricky year, a bit of a turning point year, we might say. So the gist of it is, as we said before, the Dutch sea beggars have forced Spanish ships to take refuge in the English ports. They've been attacked whilst there. Then the sea beggars have gone into English ports into hiding. Elizabeth has allowed this, so Philip is essentially accusing her of working with these sea beggars. The ships had the gold on, which was going to go and pay the Spanish army in the Netherlands. Elizabeth has taken that away. Possibly what she's thinking there is that if he can't pay the soldiers, they might get angry and have a mutiny of some sort. So indirectly, she has caused the Spanish army to not be as strong. But then that's the risk of this causing a direct consequence. There's always a consequence, isn't there? So Elizabeth takes the gold. We've already said a little bit. This is going to really anger Philip. He has got this loan from Genoa. You could argue, is Elizabeth crazy for doing this? This is, I would say, a little bit mental. But being Elizabeth and what we're starting to know about Elizabeth, you'll see that the reason why she does this and how this little crisis ends is very typically Elizabeth. All right, so she's trying to make Spain's task as difficult as possible, remember. That is what she's doing. She doesn't want direct intervention, but this Genoese loan. So on your little box there, you can summarise that. Up to the top, halfway, or wherever you think it goes. What I will say to you is after a few weeks of this, she basically just gives Philip the money back. I feel like she was always going to give the money back. Remember, she's just trying to be a nuisance. Maybe Philip got particularly angry and threatened her, and that changed whatever plan she had. But I think logically, she's in no position for a war with Spain. This was just about delaying money going to Elba. Hopefully, the soldiers will get fed up and want to go home. So this is, again, these are historical debates that people have written books on. So you colour up your opinion of the Genoese loan and what you think, and then we'll move on to the last little bit, or the last two little bits, Mary Queen of Scots and a little reminder of the Northern Rebellion. So how dangerous was the Dutch issue for Elizabeth? All right, so the Privy Council are putting pressure on her to deal with Elba. Hopefully you're happy with that by now, so far in this lesson. The Privy Council, especially those Puritans in there, Dudley, Cecil, they are really telling Elizabeth she needs to go. Elizabeth is very aware of the dangers posed by Spain's counter-reformation mission that started in the Netherlands, and it will come to England, absolutely. Any country where there's Protestants, Philip is on one. He's been sort of given the role by the Pope, remember, to do this counter-reformation. It's inevitable that this is going to, at some point, find its way to England. A war fought over religion, so if she does get involved in these European wars, could lead to a civil war in England. So hopefully that's quite clear to you as well, why this is so important and so dangerous. And more importantly, she fears France and Spain joining together, or the Catholics in France and Spain joining together. So these are all the things that she's going to try and avoid a war for, but also for you to understand how dangerous this thing was. It's quite clear, I think, hopefully it's clear to you too, that Europe is now split in a Catholic versus Protestant situation. Not quite a whole European war, but the potential there, isn't it? So you've got two sides. I suppose you could argue this is exactly the same as after the Berlin First crisis in the Cold War, of course. Now we've got this situation where you have East versus West. It's official, isn't it? You've got your NATO countries eventually. In 1955, you've got your Warsaw Pact countries. And that's how it is for the rest of the Cold War. Similarly, this is going to be the situation in Europe. Probably way beyond Elizabeth's reign, to be honest, as well. But we've now officially got this sort of Catholic versus Protestant situation in Europe. She's skint. She has no money and no resources. Keep that in mind. She fears further fighting with France. She has, by this point, sort of fixed the situation with France, ended the war with France that she inherited. Relations are a little bit strained, obviously, because they will be, particularly with this religious stuff going on. But she is also starting to potentially have a marriage alliance with the heir to the French throne. We'll talk about that in a few lessons' time. So Philip is probably more worried about England and Elizabeth joining with France than she is. But again, remember that England being a dog between two bones, that's just how she likes it. She's going to try and play these off against each other. Hopefully that means that they'll be too busy with each other to ever worry about England. And of course, at all costs, she needs to avoid a war. She's absolutely skint. So I feel like it's quite clear, isn't it, that the Dutch issue is very dangerous for England and Elizabeth. Maybe you might argue there's more potential for danger, but still, potential can very quickly become reality. All right, so now the cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. So we've talked a little bit about Mary, Queen of Scots, haven't we, and how potentially dangerous she is again. She is a Catholic. She has a son, which we'll talk about in a sec. 90% of the country would possibly prefer Mary, Queen of Scots on the throne, and she is legitimate. She is a legit Tudor through Henry VIII's sister Margaret, married into the Stuart family up in Scotland, and she is a descendant of those. So she's Elizabeth's cousin. There straight away, she isn't an illegitimate bastard or anything like that. She is genuine. She's got this real claim. Most people might say a better claim than Elizabeth if you're Catholic. She could become a figurehead for the Catholics in England or the Catholics in Europe, and she does become a figurehead in 4 plots. Sorry to give you a bit of a spoiler. There's going to be 4 plots before Mary Queen of Scots eventually will find her end. She has a son as well. So for those people who are really interested, and as we know, Parliament are very concerned about the succession, a smooth succession. If Mary Queen of Scots becomes Queen of England, then she's got a son. She's got the heir ready-made, good to go. The succession is sorted. That brings a bit of stability with it as well. Although the son, James, is currently in Scotland being raised as a Protestant. That possibly they feel they could overlook that, or at the very least, he's still quite young, so change his ways. But these are all the potential issues. So she arrives in England. We'll tell you the story in a couple of lessons' time why she ends up in England. You may remember from Key Stage 3. It's a bit of a sad story, really, on Mary's behalf. But here she is. She arrives in England after her husband is murdered. She's arrested. She manages to escape. And she comes to England, funnily enough, to ask Elizabeth for help. Remember in the game we played at the start of this course, one of the choices was, do you give her back to Scotland? Do you let her go to Europe? Or do you keep her imprisoned in England? You know, keep your friends close and your enemies closer and all that. But initially, Mary Queen of Scots is looking for her cousin to help her. Elizabeth is not going to help her. All right. So why might that be a worry for Elizabeth? It goes without saying, I feel like, is that she becomes a figurehead for all Catholic plots. So just summarise it in this little box with the bullet points on the screen right now and what we know already about Mary. Put some notes in this box, in your book, or however you're doing these notes. And again, colour up the side. How dangerous do you think Mary is in 1568? Remember, as well as Mary arriving, this is the time where the Pope has told the Catholics to stop going to her church. The Papal Bull is going to be issued, the excommunication, basically telling everyone to not follow the religious settlement. You've got some of those nobles in the Northern Rebellion, which we'll look at in a sec, remember. They're going to be recusants and they're going to undermine the Queen. So all of a sudden, remember we said the other lesson, this is definitely the end of the honeymoon period for Elizabeth I. 1568, 69, 70, 71 is the beginnings of it all really quickly going very, very badly wrong. But of course, she is going to outlive it all, last until 1603, Gloriana, greatest queen ever, but she definitely wins some dangerous battles on her time. Okay, so last bit for this lesson, again, same as before with the little white box and the bars. You could possibly do this already just from last lesson's introduction to the Northern Rebellion. Again, we will spend the whole lesson on the Northern Rebellion very soon, looking at it from the perspective of a plot with all the detail. But for now, just like the end of last lesson, it's just another bit of a danger that is linked, shall we say, to the Catholic dangers in Europe. So what event happened just 1 year later, perhaps proving Elizabeth's worries correct? So we know what that's going to be. That 1 year after Mary Queen of Scots arrives was the Northern Rebellion. Remember we said this last lesson as well, that it's a coincidence that the Northern nobles decided just as Mary arrives to have a rebellion. They hadn't had one for the previous 10 years, but again, that's really up to you to decide on that one. So, colour in your bars when you look at the little notes in the green box there. Just as a recap, that's going to help you. The most important bit, though, for you to think about when you're deciding how dangerous the Northern Rebellion is the bit in red, that this encouraged Philip to support future plots, especially with Alba's army so close. Now, we know from last lesson that Elizabeth deals with the Northern Rebellion very, very easily. The Duke of Norfolk sort of panics a little bit. She hangs about 700 people on these trees from the south to the north, just as a warning to anybody else, never to do this again. However, even though it failed, please keep in mind that this has encouraged Philip to support future plots especially with those 10,000 soldiers so close. The Catholics maybe are a little bit more empowered, shall we say, just a little bit more ready to go. Okay, so that draws a close to this lesson. It's a little bit complicated. There's quite a lot going on. It's a bit of a web, this lesson. Obviously, with it being a video, it might be quite useful for you to just replay certain bits if you're not sure, but you need to try and get your head around the whole story of the Dutch Revolt. And one of the best ways to do that really would be to write a narrative. Obviously, we don't have the narrative question in the Elizabeth paper, but just do it exactly as you would do with the Cold War. So the beginning, the middle, and the end, using your tension words, how one thing has made something else worse. Maybe something's improved the situation. In this case, nothing improves the situation. It's just one thing after another. So using the information on the screen now, use that to help you write this narrative up exactly as you would do with the Cold War. The connectives, the tension words, the process words, and beginning, middle, and end of the Dutch Revolt. That should help you get this story into a really secure way in your mind. Keeping in mind this would be useful for a question of saying something along the lines of, Elizabeth was most to blame for the breakdown in relations. How far do you agree? This could be quite a nice paragraph altogether of Elizabeth's actions or Philip's actions in the Netherlands or something else, for example. Or a 12 marker, explain why relations broke down. You may choose the Dutch Revolt as a paragraph, or the Genoese loan, or anything else. Something that was Elizabeth's fault, something that was Philip's fault, or maybe something that was the Pope's fault. That's the gist of where this topic is going. All right, so thank you once again for listening to this. If you do have any questions, let us know. And remember, all of the lessons are available on our website, stchistory.com, and YouTube has all of these online videos as well. Just make sure you don't get too far on from this one if you've got any doubts, because this is the sort of beginning where we're going to build on now for the rest of this course. All really stems from the 1560s. Okay, so thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.